My wife's betrayal shattered my world, but an unexpected twist could change everything. I never thought I'd be the kind of guy who'd say, "I didn't see it coming." But the truth is, I didn't. When you're married for years, you get comfortable, too comfortable, maybe. The little things don't seem to matter as much. A late night at work, a distant look over breakfast, a lack of intimacy that you brush off as just part of life. You ignore them because it's easier than facing the alternative. But that night, the night I found out about Emily's betrayal, there was no ignoring the signs anymore. I had come home late from the office, exhausted after yet another long day. We'd been drifting apart for months, maybe longer, but I told myself it was just a rough patch. Every couple goes through it, right? The house was quiet when I got back. Too quiet. The kind of silence that makes your stomach drop even though you don't know why yet. I kicked off my shoes, set down my briefcase, and called her name. No answer. I figured she was probably upstairs, maybe already asleep. She hadn't been feeling well lately, or so she said. As I climbed the stairs, something felt off. The air was heavier, charged with a tension I couldn't quite place. When I reached the bedroom door, it was slightly ajar, and I could see a sliver of light spilling out from inside. That's when I heard it. Voices. Not just one, but two. And the unmistakable sound of low, intimate laughter. I froze. For a moment, I convinced myself I was imagining things. Maybe she had the TV on. Maybe I was overreacting. But as I pushed the door open, the reality hit me like a freight train. There she was, my wife, in bed with another man. And not just any man, my best friend, Ryan. My heart stopped. Everything slowed down, and I felt like I was watching it happen from outside my own body. Emily didn't even notice me at first, too caught up in her whispered conversation with him. But when she did, the look on her face was something I'll never forget. Shock, fear, and guilt, all wrapped into one expression that told me everything I needed to know. She tried to speak, to explain, but I didn't want to hear it. I couldn't. I just stood there, numb, as the betrayal I had never seen coming unfolded right in front of me. Ryan scrambled to get out of bed, muttering some pathetic excuse, but I wasn't listening. I was too busy staring at Emily, the woman I had promised to love and protect, wondering how we had ended up here. "You need to leave," I finally said, my voice barely above a whisper. Ryan didn't argue. He gathered his things and left without another word, leaving the two of us alone in the wreckage of what had once been our marriage. Emily sat up, pulling the covers around herself like they could somehow shield her from the truth of what she had done. Her eyes were wide, pleading, but I couldn't meet them. I couldn't bear to look at her. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I didn't mean for it to happen." But that was the thing about betrayal, it didn't matter if it was planned or accidental. The damage was done, and there was no going back. I felt like a fool. How had I missed the signs? How had I let this happen right under my nose? I didn't say anything. I couldn't. The words wouldn't come. All I could do was turn around, walk out of the room, and leave her sitting there in the silence she had created. That night, I slept on the couch, though I didn't really sleep at all. My mind was racing, replaying the scene over and over again, trying to make sense of it. But there was no sense to be made. I had been betrayed by the two people I trusted most in the world, and there was no explanation that could make it hurt any less. Morning came, but the pain didn't fade with the sunrise. I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. Not between Emily and me, not between Ryan and me, not in my life at all. And that was the moment I knew. I had lost everything I thought I knew about love, trust, and loyalty. The next morning felt surreal, like I was living in someone else's nightmare. The light streaming through the window seemed out of place, too bright for the heaviness that hung in the air. Emily was still in the bedroom when I woke up on the couch. I could hear her moving around, but she didn't come downstairs. Neither of us knew what to say. I stared at the ceiling for what felt like hours, trying to wrap my head around what had happened. My wife had cheated on me. With Ryan. My best friend. The man who had been there for every major event in my life, graduation, my wedding, the birth of our son. He had betrayed me in the worst possible way, and so had she. Eventually, I couldn't lie there any longer. I had to do something, anything to keep from drowning in the thoughts that were consuming me. I got up, grabbed my jacket, and walked out the front door without a word. I didn't know where I was going, but I needed to get away. Away from the house, away from Emily, away from the reminders of everything that had been shattered overnight. My feet took me to the only place I could think of, my brother Jake's house. He and I hadn't been as close in recent years, but he was still family. And right now, I needed someone who hadn't stabbed me in the back. When Jake opened the door, he took one look at my face and knew something was wrong. "What happened?" he asked, his brow furrowed with concern. I couldn't even get the words out at first. It felt too raw, too unbelievable. But eventually, it all came pouring out: Emily's affair, Ryan's betrayal, the way my life had crumbled in the span of a single night. Jake listened in silence, his expression hardening with every word. "That bastard," he muttered when I finished, shaking his head in disbelief. "How could he do that to you? And Emily? God, man, I'm so sorry." Hearing someone else say it, someone who wasn't involved, who wasn't tangled up in the lies, somehow made it more real. I could feel the anger bubbling up inside me, mixing with the hurt, threatening to overflow. "What are you going to do?" Jake asked, his voice quiet. That was the million-dollar question, wasn't it? What was I going to do? Part of me wanted to walk back into that house and throw Emily out. To scream at her, at Ryan, at anyone who would listen. To demand answers, apologies, explanations. But what good would that do? None of it would change what had happened. The betrayal was still there, an immovable wall between us that no amount of talking could break down. "I don't know," I admitted. "I can't even think straight right now." Jake nodded, understanding. "Take some time, man. You don't have to decide anything today. But whatever you do, don't let them get away with it." I spent the rest of the day at his house, avoiding the inevitable return to my own. It was easier to stay here, surrounded by the familiar comfort of my brother's place, than to face the wreckage waiting for me at home. But eventually, I knew I had to go back. I couldn't hide forever. When I got home that evening, Emily was sitting at the kitchen table, her face pale and drawn. She looked like she hadn't slept, and I could see the fear in her eyes as I walked through the door. "We need to talk," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't want to talk. I wanted to walk right past her, up the stairs, and lock myself in the bedroom, away from the pain she had caused. But I knew we couldn't avoid this conversation forever. "Fine," I said, sitting down across from her. "Talk." She took a deep breath, her hands shaking as she clasped them together on the table. "I don't even know where to start," she began, her voice trembling. "I never meant for this to happen. It was a mistake, a horrible mistake." I scoffed, the bitterness in my chest rising to the surface. "A mistake? You don't accidentally end up in bed with someone, Emily. Don't insult me by calling it that." Tears welled up in her eyes, but I didn't feel any sympathy. Not anymore. "You're right," she admitted, her voice breaking. "It wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. A terrible, selfish choice. But I never wanted to hurt you. Stop," I cut her off, unable to listen to her excuses any longer. "Just stop. I don't want to hear your reasons. I don't care why you did it. You destroyed everything we had, and for what? For him? For Ryan?" She flinched at his name, and I saw the guilt etched on her face. But that only fueled my anger. How could she have thrown away our marriage, our family, for someone like him? Someone who didn't give a damn about me or what he was doing to my life. "I don't know why," she whispered, tears streaming down her face now. "I don't know what I was thinking. I'm sorry, Jake. I'm so sorry." But sorry wasn't enough. Not this time. I stood up, my heart pounding in my chest, and looked down at her. "I need space," I said, my voice cold. "I need time to figure out what the hell I'm going to do. But right now, I can't be around you." Without waiting for a response, I turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving her sobbing at the table. I didn't look back. As I drove away from the house again, I felt a strange sense of relief. For the first time since discovering the affair, I had taken control of the situation. I didn't know what the future held, but one thing was clear: I wasn't going to let this destroy me. Not anymore. The days that followed felt like walking through a fog, a blur of emotions too heavy to process all at once. I stayed at my brother Jake's house, avoiding home as much as I could. Every time I thought of Emily, of Ryan, I felt a surge of anger and pain so deep it was hard to breathe. I knew I couldn't keep running, but I wasn't ready to face the wreckage of my life. Jake, to his credit, gave me space. He didn't push me to talk or offer any hollow advice. He just let me be, which was exactly what I needed. But eventually, I knew I couldn't avoid making a decision. The betrayal hung over me like a storm cloud, and no matter how far I ran, it followed me. One evening, as the sun was setting, I got a text from Emily. "We need to talk. Please, Jake, just come home." I stared at the message for a long time, my thumb hovering over the screen. Part of me wanted to delete it, to keep her words out of my head. But I knew she was right. We couldn't avoid this forever. I drove home that night, my stomach in knots, unsure of what to expect. The house felt foreign as I stepped inside, like I was intruding on someone else's life. Emily was sitting in the living room, her face pale, her eyes puffy from crying. She looked up when I entered, her expression a mix of fear and hope. "Thank you for coming," she said softly. I didn't respond, just sat down across from her, waiting for her to speak. I had nothing to say. Not yet. She took a deep breath, her hands trembling in her lap. I've been thinking a lot about what happened. About us, and what I did. Her voice broke, and she wiped at her eyes, trying to steady herself. I don't expect you to forgive me. I know I don't deserve that. But I need you to know how sorry I am. For everything. I remained silent, watching her, waiting for more. Apologies were easy. What I needed was the truth. I don't know why I did it, she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. I was lonely, I guess. We'd been drifting apart for so long, and I didn't know how to fix it. Ryan, he was just there, and I made a terrible choice. One I'll regret for the rest of my life. The mention of Ryan's name sent a jolt of anger through me, but I pushed it down. This wasn't about him. Not right now. I don't want to lose you, Jake, she said, her voice shaking. I know I've messed up, but I love you. I never stopped loving you. Please, just give us a chance to fix this. I felt a cold, bitter laugh rise in my throat. Love? How could she talk about love after what she had done? After she had destroyed everything we had built together? I don't know if that's possible, I said, my voice flat. You betrayed me, Emily. You lied to me, over and over again. How am I supposed to trust you after this? How am I supposed to look at you and not see what you did? Her face crumpled, tears streaming down her cheeks. I know, she whispered. I know I've broken your trust, and I don't expect you to just forgive me. But please, Jake, don't throw everything away. We can rebuild. We can. I cut her off, my frustration boiling over. Rebuild what, Emily? The trust? The love? How? How do we move past something like this? She looked down, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. I could see the pain in her eyes, the regret, but it wasn't enough. Not anymore. I don't know if I can ever forgive you, I said, the words feeling like a final nail in the coffin of our marriage. I don't know if I even want to. The silence that followed was deafening. Emily didn't say anything, didn't try to argue. She knew, just like I did, that some things can't be undone. After what felt like an eternity, I stood up, the weight of my decision pressing down on me. I'm going to stay with Jake for a while, I said quietly. I need space. I need time to figure out what's next. Emily didn't try to stop me. She just nodded, her face pale and tear-streaked, as I turned and walked out of the room. As I left the house that night, I knew that this was it. There was no going back. Whatever happened next, my marriage to Emily was over. The life we had shared was gone, shattered beyond repair. But for the first time since discovering the affair, I felt a strange sense of relief. It was over. The lies, the betrayal, the pretending, it was all done. Now, it was time to start figuring out who I was without her. The days after I left Emily were the hardest. There's something about walking away from someone you thought you'd spend your life with that leaves a hole inside you. Even though I was the one who left, it didn't make the pain any easier. Every quiet moment reminded me of what I had lost, what I had let go. Staying with Jake had been a temporary escape, but I knew I couldn't live in his guest room forever. Eventually, I had to face the reality of my situation. I had to figure out how to move on. I spent hours driving around the city, trying to distract myself from the thoughts that kept creeping in. What if I had done things differently? What if I had seen the signs earlier? What if I had fought harder for my marriage? But no matter how many times I replayed the past in my head, the outcome was the same. Emily had made her choice. Ryan had made his. Now it was my turn to make mine. One evening, Jake and I were sitting on his porch, beers in hand, watching the sun sink below the horizon. He hadn't pushed me to talk since that first night, but I could tell he was waiting for me to say something. He'd always been like that, letting me come to him in my own time. Finally, I broke the silence. I don't know what to do next, I admitted, my voice sounding hollow. It's like, everything I thought I knew about my life is gone. And I don't even know where to start. Jake took a long sip of his beer before answering. You don't have to know right now. It's gonna take time, man. There's no easy fix for something like this. But you'll figure it out. You're stronger than you think. I wasn't sure if I believed him. I didn't feel strong. I felt lost, like a ship adrift without a compass. But I nodded anyway, because what else could I do? Do you think, I hesitated, the question I had been avoiding finally coming to the surface. Do you think I made the right choice? Leaving her? Jake looked at me, his eyes serious. I think you made the choice you had to make. She betrayed you, Jake. That's not something you can just sweep under the rug. If you'd stayed, it would have eaten you alive. He was right, of course. I knew that deep down. But part of me still clung to the idea that maybe, somehow, things could have been different. That maybe, if I had fought harder, we could have found a way to fix what was broken. But that was just a fantasy. The reality was much messier. Much more painful. Yeah, I said quietly. I guess you're right. We sat in silence for a while after that, the weight of everything hanging in the air between us. But for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel completely alone. Jake might not have all the answers, but he was there. And right now, that was enough. A few days later, I went back to the house to collect my things. Emily wasn't there, thankfully. I wasn't ready to face her again, not yet. The house felt strange as I walked through it, like it belonged to someone else. The memories were everywhere, the photos on the walls, the furniture we had picked out together, the smell of her perfume still lingering in the air. But those memories weren't enough to keep me there. They weren't enough to fix what had been broken. I packed my bags quickly, grabbing the essentials and leaving the rest behind. As I stood in the doorway, ready to leave for the last time, I took one last look around. This house had been my home for years. Now, it was just a reminder of everything that had fallen apart. I didn't feel sad as I walked out the door. I felt free. It took time, but slowly, things started to change. I found an apartment not too far from Jake's place, a small, simple one-bedroom that was perfect for starting over. It wasn't much, but it was mine. A fresh start. I began to focus on work, throwing myself into projects to keep my mind occupied. It wasn't always easy, some days were better than others. But slowly, I started to feel like myself again. One day, a few weeks after I moved into my new place, I got a call from Ryan. Seeing his name on my phone made my stomach churn, and for a moment, I considered ignoring it. But something in me needed closure. I needed to hear what he had to say. I answered the call, my voice flat. "What do you want?" There was a pause on the other end of the line before Ryan spoke, his voice filled with regret. "Jake, I know I'm the last person you want to hear from, but I had to call. I had to tell you how sorry I am." I clenched my jaw, the anger I had been holding back rising to the surface. "Sorry? You think sorry makes up for what you did? You slept with my wife, Ryan. You lied to my face for God knows how long. And now you think an apology is going to fix that?" "I know it won't," he said quickly. "I know I screwed up. I ruined our friendship, I destroyed everything. But I need you to know that I never meant for any of this to happen. It just got out of control." I laughed bitterly. "Out of control? That's what you're calling it? You made a choice, Ryan. You chose to betray me. Don't try to act like it was some accident." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. When Ryan spoke again, his voice was quieter. "You're right. I did choose. And I'm going to have to live with that for the rest of my life. I wanted you to know that I'm sorry. For whatever it's worth." I didn't respond right away. I wasn't sure what to say. Part of me wanted to tell him to go to hell, to hang up and never speak to him again. But another part of me, some small, wounded part, wanted to forgive him. Not for his sake, but for mine. "I don't know if I can forgive you," I said finally, my voice soft. "But I'm done letting this destroy me. I've got to move on." Ryan sighed, and I could hear the relief in his voice. "I understand. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted to say it." I didn't say goodbye as I hung up the phone. There was nothing left to say. That night, as I lay in my new apartment, I realized that for the first time in months, I wasn't consumed by anger. I wasn't thinking about Emily or Ryan. I wasn't replaying the betrayal over and over in my mind. I was just letting go. The weeks after my phone call with Ryan felt different. There was still pain, but it wasn't as sharp anymore, not like it had been when I first found out. The anger had softened too, replaced by a strange calm I hadn't felt in months. I wasn't healed, not entirely, but I wasn't drowning in bitterness either. I had decided to let go. Moving on wasn't about forgiving Emily or Ryan, at least not in the way people usually talked about forgiveness. It wasn't about making peace with what they had done, because I couldn't. It was about choosing to not let it define me any longer. I had spent too many nights replaying their betrayal, trying to figure out what went wrong. But now, I realized it didn't matter. What mattered was where I went from here. One evening, I sat at a coffee shop near my new apartment, flipping through job listings on my laptop. I'd been thinking about making a change for a while now, something to shake up my life and get me out of the routine I had fallen into during my marriage. The idea of moving to a new city had been on my mind, a fresh start in every sense of the word. I had just clicked on a listing for a job in Denver when I heard a familiar voice behind me. "Jake?" I turned and saw Emily standing a few feet away, holding a cup of coffee in one hand, her expression a mixture of surprise and uncertainty. I hadn't seen her since the night I left the house, and the sight of her now brought back a flood of memories, both good and bad. "Hey," I said, my voice calm, surprising even myself. I gestured to the chair across from me. "You want to sit?" She hesitated for a moment before taking the seat, her eyes scanning the table awkwardly. "I didn't expect to see you here." "Yeah, I've been staying nearby," I said, closing my laptop. Just trying to figure things out. Emily nodded, her hands wrapped tightly around her coffee cup. How have you been? It was such a simple question, one that normally would have felt impossible to answer. But now, I found that I had a response. I've been okay. Better, actually. She looked down, a flicker of something, regret, maybe, crossing her face. I'm glad to hear that. For a moment, we sat in silence, the weight of everything that had happened between us hanging in the air. I could see that she was struggling to find the right words, the right way to address the mess we had made of our lives. But I wasn't looking for an apology, not anymore. I don't hate you, I said quietly, surprising myself again. I thought I did, for a while. But I don't. I'm just ready to move on. Emily looked up at me, her eyes wide with surprise. You don't? I shook my head. No. What happened? It hurt. It broke me for a while. But I can't keep holding on to that. I need to let go, for my own sake. I don't know what's next for me, but I know I can't live in the past anymore. She nodded slowly, her expression softening. I'm sorry, Jake. I know that doesn't change anything, but I am. For everything. I know, I said, offering her a small, sad smile. And I'm sorry too, for whatever part one played in this falling apart. But we're both better off now. We didn't talk much after that. There wasn't much left to say. After a few more minutes of polite conversation, Emily stood to leave, offering me a final, heartfelt goodbye. And just like that, she was gone. As I watched her walk out of the coffee shop, I felt a sense of closure wash over me. Not the kind that comes from resolving every issue or mending every wound, but the kind that comes from accepting that some things are just over. That sometimes, the only way forward is to let go of the past. That night, I went back to my apartment and finished my application for the job in Denver. I didn't know if I'd get it, but that wasn't the point. The point was, I was finally ready for something new. And no matter where life took me next, I knew one thing for sure, I was going to be okay.